reusable resources, as we like to think of them these days, into heat and gas and pollutants and toxic ash. All of this lime is used to filter it. These bags, which are the filter bags, each one of those is the size of a house. Okay? And that stuff is made of Kevlar, stuff they make bulletproof vests out of. Because if it wasn't, the tiny metal fragments that still get through at that stage would rip it to pieces. So that's why it's made of Kevlar. The problem, of course, is that it has to leave tiny apertures within it, otherwise nothing would get through. So the pollutants have got to get out of those tiny holes. We'll come back to that, because all of the white areas are areas within the county where, give or take a coal shed or a tree or two, you would actually be able to see it. More facts about it. It's going to cost £500 million. There'll be about 40 long-term jobs apparently secured from it. That's the amount of waste that they're planning to burn in it. It has to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, except perhaps for a day a year when it has a maintenance day. There's some pretty serious questions about whether the volume of municipal solid waste, which is what the project was supposed to be about from the outset, whether there's sufficient there to justify that level of incineration. Very serious questions. And these questions were picked up by the government's own inspector when he came to do the examination in public of the county's waste core strategy, which should have been in place a long time ago, because it's the planning document against which this application is supposed to be judged. In fact, they've only just adopted the waste core strategy, so they have to top it up with commercial and industrial waste. Now, the County Council doesn't know how much commercial and industrial waste is produced in Gloucestershire. The inspector told them emphatically, "You've not given me any evidence whatsoever to show me that you know how much is arising. You have a faint idea of how much you're managing in the county, but that's not the arising." There is an issue that there will still be landfill stuff, because there will be bottom ash, which they now claim that they will be able to make into a sort of a building block, and there will still be toxic fly ash. And we think probably because there's been such a furore about the facility at Bishop's Cleeve, I don't know how many people know about the Bishop's Cleeve facility, there's a toxic waste dump at Bishop's Cleeve facility where roughly half the nation's toxic waste goes, because there aren't many licensed sites. And it's a giant open pit, which is supposed to be damped down, and at the back there you can see the poor bloody residents of Bishop's Cleeve. Thermodynamically impossible, my expert tells me, to get any better than 24% of the actual energy converted into electricity. All the rest will be heat that goes straight up, in a plastic bottle up, it says PET on the bottom. It's to do with various ratings of the grades of plastic. So what they're telling us from the US is, A, they've looked at 34 different types of waste, and in every case, you can get a better energy saving by recycling it than by burning it and turning it into electricity. We're told that it's a great idea to produce electricity from it. There's the comparison. Modern gas-fired power stations are getting more and more efficient. At the moment, they're rated at 375 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour being pumped into the atmosphere, whereas this incinerator will produce 500 grams of CO2. So it isn't as efficient as a gas-fired power station. The emissions, well, you get all sorts of chemicals, not as listed there, which arguably do create acid rain. The protected Cotswold beaches, these are, as it floats over you and heads on up, we've got Cotswold beaches, but they're a European recognised site of special scientific interest. And they are beginning to struggle, the Cotswold beaches. And one of the issues that came out of the environmental impact studies that they had to do was that it was questionable whether this would have an additional impact on them or not. The monitoring, there is on-site monitoring of various things, but some of the issues, some of the stuff that's emitted only gets monitored on a quarterly visit. We picked out cadmium in particular here because the Coal Protection Agency produces what they call tolerable daily intake level. Cadmium is already 32% above the maximum tolerable daily intake for a child in area of Junction 12 before it's built, and that's all down to traffic and whatever else is going. The point I mentioned earlier about the filtering bags is the tiny little hole. This is a World Health Organization, so quite totally independent of us. The particles being so small, they beat the hairs in your nose first, and then they beat the other sort of protective systems you've got in your lungs, and they get into the blood vessels, and then they circulate. You can see Professor Vivian Howard, very definitely a health expert, particularly with children. And for somebody eminent like him to go as far as to say public concern over these inadequacies, in my opinion, understandable and justified, is quite a thing, really. And the Spanish one, that's actually a very recent one, which is very interesting, with Urbasa being a Spanish outfit. Research in Spain now is saying significant increase in the risk of dying from cancers in towns near incinerators. UK Health Protection Agency, again, Stan Waddington keeps trying to tell everybody that they're doing some research to reassure people. And we keep saying, no research organisation worth its salt would ever say, I'm doing some research to reassure you. It does research to find out the facts and tell people what they've found out. So, presumably, they're coming at it from an entirely neutral standpoint. And in 2014, they're planning to report on that, which is why some of the councillors at county tried to get the county council to agree to delay the project until the results were available, but they've refused to do that. It gives you an idea of the range of it, really. I'm sure you all know that the wind blows mainly southwest, sort of straight up the estuary, and sometimes from west. Right, the famous outline business case. Initially, the county came up with a saving of £150 million, which they said is what would be saved over 25 years. And they did that simply by projecting the costs of landfill tax, mainly, against what they believed they could get, you know, as a contract with incineration. The problem was that the taxation system that they were talking about, as I mentioned earlier, once the government drew the PFI money, for exactly the same reason that they were already meeting their targets for diverting compostable waste, exactly the same reason, they pulled the taxation system. They were not going to tax people anymore. Gloucestershire had been busy putting money aside to buy credits in that system, because at that point, of course, they were burying more than they should have been. So they were buying credits, and they built up this kitty of £13 million. And they built it up because they'd overestimated the amount of waste. They've told us since, oh no, it's still saving 150 million, we're just calculating it a different way. We said, well, how then? So we can't tell you that because it's commercial confidentiality. So we don't know, you don't know. We really believe that the doubts, it's quite complicated the way they do the totting up of the waste arising. So they've done things like getting a new stream when garden waste started to be collected, and they've left that in the figures, and later on realised, oh, that's actually distorted the figures, because garden waste can be AD'd. You chop it up and stick it in an anaerobic digester, so it's out of the waste stream. Household recycling centres, they put a lot of information in, was being collected in HRCs, and then they found that small businesses, trying to dodge a few skip costs, were taking their stuff into the household recycling centres, and that went on for a couple of years before the county stopped it. Once they stopped it, the levels that were being categorised as household waste then went down again. But they hadn't taken that out of the figures. Then they did their projection. They say, oh, you know, when the economy is back together, I'm not quite sure when that is going to be now, but you will all start making more waste again. So in their projections for the next 40 years, they put a 2.2% per annum increase in the waste that's going to be generated. They estimated what the 11-12 arisings would be in 2006-07, around about then anyway. And they got it so wrong, because it proved afterwards they'd overestimated it by 20%. Well, you'd think, you know, when they draw in their graph, they would at least adjust for that before they started rising again. No. This straight on, and they use that to justify this incinerator. Looking at the alternatives, We know from the research that we've done that if you look at what is being charged in established incinerators that are already running and MBTs that are running, pretty much MET is £20 per tonne less. That's the information we've got from Avon as well as a major facility running. Yeah, this is the other reason why a business case looks very dodgy. You'll appreciate that because they have to get the bankers in to fund these things, that's why you have to have a 25 to 30 year contract, because they're borrowing so much money for a project this size, it's got to be spread over that period for the bankers to make their money. So there's no flexibility now. They've committed us to this process, and whatever else might be better now, might be better in the future, we will not be able to go there because we are stuck with this process. It has no flexibility whatsoever. But now they're discussing the possibility of incinerator taxes. So the county has ignored the fact that the landfill tax is gone, and now they're ignoring the fact that there might be another one on the way that they're going to walk right into. We get to this point. They've overestimated the waste arisings. They should have excluded the garden waste. They shouldn't have put that annual increase in. We haven't even mentioned overcapacity yet, but you will see it come up in a minute when we run the DVD. But Eunomia, who are the acknowledged consultancy experts, who Gloucestershire are actually using themselves at the moment, we discovered the other day, but they are used by local authorities and government levels right up to national government. They do a regular report, and there's another one out this week, but we saw the one in May, which said quite clearly there is going to be overcapacity of waste processing facilities in every region of this country in the year 2015/16. Okay? That's when ours will begin to operate. And where are these facilities? Well, they're all around us, because if you look at them in terms of what planning permission has been granted, or what's in the pipeline, or what's already in the process of being built, we've got them all around us. We've got the facilities down at Avonmouth, Monmouthshire, they're going to build them, Gloucestershire are going to build them, Warwickshire's going to build them, Oxfordshire is going to build them. That's a complete circle. You know, we're encircled with them. And those who are interested in this stuff might come across what they call the proximity principle, which says you should deal with your waste arisings close to where they arise. But when you get the map out, what you find is that Tewkesbury would be just as close to Worcester as they would be to Javelin Park. And the North Cotswold would be just as close to Oxfordshire as they would to Javelin Park, and so on and so forth. So you could distribute your waste around those, and you might get them used. Waste management hierarchy is something that is absolutely recognised and is set down in legislation at every level up to the European Union. So it's just a process. As you can see, best option. Prevention goes right back to things, how we design things to last longer. We try to reduce it. We try to reuse things as much as possible. We try to recycle them as much as possible. MBT and AD is a better way. At the bottom of the process, you can get to landfill, or ATT is alternative thermal treatment. Dispersed sites, that actually is not intended to equate to that. It's about saying, what I said just now really, that there are facilities all around you, or if you've got more localised facilities like AD facilities, you can place those around your county and you can cut down the amount of miles that your waste travels. So, yeah, GCC's target of 60% by 2020, at the moment they're at about 47–48%. They're convinced they'll get to 60% reasonably easy, so am I. You'll notice that Stroud's now doing curbside collection, Cotswold is doing the same. That's going to reduce the total amount of waste arisings that goes for dumping at the moment by about 6,000 tonnes a year. So those sorts of contributions are what are going to get them up to 60%. They say they aspire to 70%, but they think that's very challenging, and Stan personally doesn't believe that you will get anywhere near. Can it be done? Well, South Oxfordshire, yes, they're up to 70% now. Amazingly, you know, one of the things Urbaser Balfour BT staff said to me, you don't need to worry about us running out of material, there'll always be disposable nappies. Well, no, there won't, because this firm in Birmingham has found a way to recycle that. Somehow they squidge all the stuff out that you don't really want to know about, and turn that into a sort of a methane project. I'm not quite sure whether they go directly for generating electricity from that or gas.
Gas, I think.
Gas. They make plastic roof tiles out of all the plastic element, and the rest of the cottony stuff they managed to get into a sort of AD process and compost it. So, you know, you really can compost anything. The extra thing that MBT does is, because when it gets onto the site, they rip the black plastic bags open. It gives them a second opportunity to look to see whether there's any additional recyclates there before it goes off for digestion. Yeah, and this is an example of a site where they built one that cost, it's amazing, isn't it? 41 million, and we're talking about $500 million. You can see the volumes it's going to process are quite comfortably what would cope with ours. And amazingly, our friends Sir Balfour Beatty are building an MBT plant for Essex. And why are they building one for Essex? Why aren't they building them a mass burn incinerator? Well, we asked them, and they said, well, because Essex didn't want a mass burn incinerator. This is a little anaerobic digestion plant, so it gives you an idea of the scale of it, really. That they're quite small, and they can be housed on small industrial units and within farm buildings and things. And there you're talking about 3,000 to 5,000. That probably should say tonnes per annum after of food waste per year. We mentioned earlier about the alternative thermal treatments. These aren't exactly popular with environmentalists, for good reason, because there is still some adverse impact from them. The great benefit of going to gasification, pyrolysis, or a plasma arc facility, and you can see again the scale of these is quite small. First of all, within the process, they create less, they don't create toxic waste, and the main reason for that is because of the temperatures that they heat stuff up to. So it atomizes stuff and it destroys all the toxins. And then the gas that it produces, they burn the same way to produce energy. The beauty of them being so much smaller physically and much lower capital cost is that you can get involved in these projects for a much shorter duration. So as the better recycling technology comes along, you've got a contract, there's contracts around for these things of say 7, 9 years. You know, as you're progressing through that, you're looking where you're going to move next, and if you can get some better recycling contracts, so less and less of it is going for thermal treatment, great, you can sign off these contracts and say we don't need that anymore. But with MVI, you're stuck for 30 years. This is the newer facility down at Avonmouth. This is the one that Stan is always condemning. The reason he condemns it is because the RDF, or the residual stuff that comes out the end of it, at the moment, New Earth Solutions chug across the North Sea to Holland, and it gets burnt in an energy for waste project. So Stan says, whoa, this is a joke. You know, they're still burning it and it's being carted across the North Sea. Say, well, yeah, but tell them the whole story, Stan. A, it's a temporary arrangement. They're actually building their own gasification plant, which will be ready next year. And the other perhaps more interesting fact than that is that the reason that they can take it to Holland is because Holland and Germany have got overcapacity already, and that has created a market. So there's huge demand over there for British rubbish, because they can't get enough to fill their incinerators. This is exactly where we're going, unless we can stop it. So you can see from there the lower gate fees is mentioned again, and the improved diversion rates in landfill. That was Councillor Hopkins from Bristol who said, you'd be crazy to go with an Ashburn incinerator, just think. So that's the sort of comparison that we see between the available technologies. Yeah, where have we got to? Planning permission. It was due to be considered on the 17th of January, but a few days back, Kent Council announced that it wasn't going to hear it on the 17th of January. I don't know what you followed in the press, but there's been quite a furore about the fact that the planning officer who's been dealing with this case for 9 months there's a pretty strong feeling that he was at the point of recommending refusal. He's no longer working on the project. And there's a team of consultants involved now who are going to write the report and make the recommendation. We're obviously going to see this through to the bitter end. My personal saying about it is that it's not over until the fat incinerator smokes. We've got to the point where we've been encouraging people to send letters of objection for the application directly to the County Council. And Ian tells me that we've passed the 2,000 mark now, people who've objected to it. But we're also asking people to write to the Secretary of State and ask him to call it in. The call-in. Yeah, the call-in that basically is the Secretary of State, who on this occasion would be Mr. Pickles. So we've got standard letters on the website for doing this, or better, if people write their own individually, but you can get information from it that will help you to do that. And simply really to say, you know, for the following reasons, we think you should call this application in, and you should make the decision about it.
Now see how this approach will be blighted as the incinerator comes into view on your right-hand side.